Welcome to the Industrial Athletic Trainers Society VNS On Demand. We are excited to share with you value-added continue education programs. Stick around at the end, or check the video description for more details on how members can claim their CU credits.
All right, looks like it is now.
Is it doing it? Okay. Yes,
Yep,
I see
good
the red
stuff.
dot.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Jessica.
Well, thank you, Lex, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here on this Saturday afternoon, getting towards the end of the day. It's been very exciting, at least for me. Hope everyone else is getting some great information and networking out of this conference. So today I would like to talk to you about providing proactive workplace safety measures and through integrating it with movement screens. So it's going to address the biomechanical and non-biomechanical risk factors and integrates the development of a movement screen that I have put together. So you can go to the next screen, Lexi. So again, as everyone else has mentioned in their presentations today, the disclosure is that I have no financial disclosure or conflicts of interest with the material that's presented here. It's just for educational purposes and hopefully adoption at different various sites. And you can go to the next one. So the objectives of today's discussion, one is that the learner will be able to distinguish between biomechanical and non-biomechanical risk factors that contribute to injury. They'll be able to describe the significance of assessing movement patterns in workers to identify potential risk factors for injury. To be able to list the 7 fundamental movement patterns of the utility worker movement screen that was created. They'll be able to correctly administer the utility worker movement screen to an individual and document the scores of each movement pattern. And then once the movement pattern has been completed, be able to evaluate a client's results and recommend corrective exercises for improvements in the workers' activities. Go ahead, Lexi. So just starting out from the basics, because I like to start from the beginning, and just to remind us, what is the role of an athletic trainer in the utility setting? So when I took this first question, I thought about, we want to identify risks. We want to create preventative strategies for the worker. And we also want to promote those healthy choices for them, where we're trying to get that total worker aspect for a healthy environment, healthy living. So when we're talking about even identifying the risk factors, we want to talk about the unique physical demands and hazards of the industry, and in this particular case, the industrial, the utility industry. And be able to have the athletic trainer target specific interventions for that industry. Creating those prevention strategies, those include the job coaching, the ergonomic principles, as well as the stretching, flexibility, and conditioning programs to address any type of imbalances that the employee might have. And then again, promoting those healthy choices that allow for proper rest and recovery, overall wellness, and that total worker health principles that we strive for. Go ahead, Lexi. So what I thought was an important factor was when we're trying to explain to people or workers, what is it that we do? Why are we there? Why are we on site, right? And they think, oh, to prevent injuries, to prevent lost time and whatnot. But it basically falls into 2 aspects. It will fall into mechanical, biomechanical, and non-biomechanical. So when we talk about mechanical, biomechanical, we're talking about those risk factors that include the worker actually performing the job day in, day out. So the awkward postures, the excessive force, the repetitive tasks, vibration, contact stress. So we're talking about actually the ergonomic piece of the job, right? And then the non-biomechanical that also play into injury risk. And that includes age, medical conditions, prior injury, physical fitness level, lifestyle behaviors. So when we look, and creating this movement screen is more in that aspect. It more has to do with those non-biomechanical factors that we can address a little bit more readily with our employees and kind of lends into our skill sets that we already have. So when we look at those, we talk about age. Okay, so as the literature has shown, age, the older the worker, they're usually going to have reduced physical capacity, more susceptible to injury based on reduced strength, reduced flexibility, and just as the body breaks down over time. With the medical conditions, a lot of people come with preconceived medical conditions. They have heart disease, they may have arthritis, they may have diabetes. Those are longstanding issues that all indirectly affect or differently affect the body. So if we talk about heart disease, it can be an increased risk as they increase their physical demands, it puts more pressure on their heart. Arthritis, they're going to have limited mobility and pain. So those are factors that we see and workers have, but we also want to try to be able to modify those or assist in helping those become less involved. So, and then the previous injury, that's a big one, because we've known through the literature that past injuries affect future chance of injury, right? We've seen it in concussions, we've seen it in any other type of injury. Someone rolls an ankle, sprains an ankle, and then they're more susceptible to spraining that ankle again. And the closer that you get to the time between those sprains or strains, then the more likely that there is going to be a higher increased risk of injury. So we definitely want to look into that aspect when we're trying to create this movement screen. And then the physical fitness. The more physical someone is, or the less physical they are, I should say, the greater chance that you're going to have more chance of injury with the limited mobility and limited demands that you're placing on the body, whether it's through work-related or non-work-related issues. And then the lifestyle behaviors. So we know that smoking is bad for hip bone and muscle tissue healing. Sleep habits can also negatively affect musculoskeletal health. If you've been listening to some of the other lectures that have gone on today or presentations, that those have been discussed numerously. So again, they're both very important. So when you talk about the individual biomechanical risks, we're talking about those are identified through observation at your job sites or on the assembly line or wherever you may be working. Those are the things that you see, you look at, you can make modifications for them. And then the individual assessments for that are your quick job coaching or your modifications to a particular behavior that are going to help prevent those injuries. Now, when you talk about the non-biomechanical injuries, we're talking about those are usually learned from discussing or talking with an employee, when you're taking a history, when you are doing a physical assessment. That's when you're really getting to know the individual and knowing kind of where they've been and how they've gotten to it to this point. And then trying to find a way to have a risk assessment for that would be using these movement screens, okay? So we can go to the next slide, Lexi. And so how do we want to proactively address this risk? Again, through the use of a movement screen. Now, with the three main components of a movement screen that we thought of when we developed this was we wanted it quick and easy. We wanted it to be ideally less than 5 minutes. And we wanted the person to be able to be just, in their regular work clothes. They didn't have to change into workout gear. And then that they didn't have to lay down. So I know a lot of you, and what I'll talk about in a few minutes is where we kind of got the concept of the movements and the scoring was from the basic FMS, functional movement screens, through Greg Hook. So our thought there was it's already sort of been established. It has some literature to it. It's had some inter-rater reliability and some validity studies looked at it. So why recreate the wheel if we don't have to, right? So we wanted it quick and easy, but we didn't want the actual FMS because we didn't want them to have to get on the ground. We didn't want to have them spend a lot of time with them in that environment. So that was the other part with a standardized process. We wanted it to be standardized across all of our different clients so that if we were doing it, we were doing it all the same. And that way we could collect data that would all be representing the same information. And a lot of people, and we could make them individualized. So this allowed us to find out individually where your weaknesses or areas of improvement were, and then how we were going to create a program specifically for you to improve your overall well-being, but also decrease your risk of injury. So those were our main components of it. And we wanted to use basically 3 pillars of performance when we're doing those corrective exercises with 3 pillars of performance, which we will get into in a little bit. But the other thing that was important that would come out of this is that when we rolled it out, a lot of people were like, oh, is this something new? Again, we're all ideally probably have been in the setting where I don't have a lot of time. The employee doesn't have a lot of time. I don't want to have to do more work. I don't, you already have enough work. You don't want to have to now I'm going to do this on top of an evaluation or on top of some other aspect that I'm doing in my job setting. And no, a lot of you are probably already doing movement screens to some degree. You're just not calling it a movement screen. If you're doing an assessment, you're doing some range of motion, you're doing some functional tasks, that's a movement screen. So you're really already doing them. It's just putting it into a standardized process and asking everybody to do the same movements when you do an evaluation. So, but anyway, we'll get a little more into that in a few minutes. So you can change the screen, please, Lexi. So I guess the importance of trying to sell it and get people to do it and why it's important is, why are we doing these in the first place? Does it serve a purpose? Yes, I think it does. It allows us to represent the body moving in a coordinated unit. As far as patterns, it allows to be efficient and functional, not even just at work, but through daily life. And it ensures proper muscle activation and joint alignment across various motions. And as we know, the body is, a kinetic chain. So it's all interconnected. So you want to make sure that, we're teaching them how to move properly, because a lot of people, and I'm sure you've seen it at your sites, don't move properly. It's just kind of what you've learned, especially the older employees, what they've learned and what's worked doesn't mean it's always the best way to do something. And again, trying to make changes is never easy. So it's trying to adapt that and get them to really buy in and understand how you can make them feel better and how they can have more activity outside of work as well. And what Lexi put down in the chat, I believe, was this article, The Importance of Movement Patterns. And I think it comes from the FMS, but I think it just gives you a little bit more explanation than what I'm putting here as far as why movement patterns are so important. And you can move to the next slide, Lexi, please. Okay, so here we go. How did we develop this movement screen? Okay, so I already gave away a little bit of that by saying it was based on the functional movement screen by Gray Cook. And again, told you kind of why it's easier to recreate something and kind of adapt it. So it's not exactly the same, which you'll see, but it's similar in a lot of ways. And again, that just cut down on time. Why create something new when you don't have to, that also doesn't have any research necessarily behind it? What we did find as a side note was that when we were looking at movement screens in the industrial setting, it didn't necessarily have to be with utilities. That just happens to be the setting I work in. But there is really no research on it. There's research of movement screens being used in college, in high school, and in gyms. And even there was at least one article on firefighters, and there may have been one other article on one other industry. But it's very, very rare, and it's lacking. So this gave us a great opportunity to try to move it into this environment, to be proactive and to see what we get for results. So the first part of it, we wanted it to have an injury history. I mentioned earlier that injury history is important because someone that has an injury is more susceptible to being injured again. So that was the first thing. So we want in our questionnaire or our sheet that we were going to use with the employees when we performed one, the first thing was we were going to ask them a couple of questions about history. So in order to know what body parts we wanted to really, in body parts and movements we wanted to do, we actually did a review of past incidences. So we needed to get a history on kind of in our setting, what are the most common injuries that we're seeing and that are becoming recordable or that are keeping people out on long-term disability. So we did a 3-year look back of our incident management system that our company does. And it came down to basically, should be no surprise to most people, it was shoulder, cervical, lower back, and knee were our 4 main components. So with that in mind, when we were going to do this screen, we wanted to ask, just after demographics, a few questions about those specific body parts. If they had a current issue with it, if they had a past history with it, and if they had any surgical interventions. And then that would allow us to look at that differently depending on their scores to see if there was a correlation there. With the risk assessment, we picked the 7 movements that we thought would best encompass those types of body injuries. And then it would allow us to determine areas for improvement with those employees. And then with the preventative measures, we had individualized corrective exercise programs. Again, they were based on these 3 pillars of performance, which I will talk about, I promise. And we also created some basic, when we're talking about job-specific conditioning programs, we kept them, they were all pretty much standardized to some degree, where we would add then in a few of them. So that way we weren't getting into prescriptive exercises, and we weren't following a specific injury per se. Okay, Lexi, I can go on to the next one, please. So again, this is just follows up a little bit more on how it's a comprehensive assessment. It identifies functional limitations and imbalances. It allows us to create a baseline for workers. And ideally, it was to get some new workers when they first get hired, in order to say, okay, here we are. It's not a job performance task. It's not a job offer. It's not going to put them on restrictions or anything like that. We're just trying to get a baseline assessment so that we can determine some stuff, help them along the way to help prevent them from getting injured in the first place in their work environment. The screens will assess some form of posture, some form of mobility, and some form of stability. And then those findings are used to tailor those corrective exercises. So it's kind of an assess, an analyze, and intervene. We assess by using the scoring sheet and getting a background on them. We analyze the scores that we get and look for asymmetries and potential imbalances. We'll discuss the results with them, and then we provide an intervention as far as creating individualized programs and validating for progress, and ideally for a follow-up or a retest somewhere down the line. Go ahead, Lexi. So some of our hypotheses going into when we created the movement screen, we had 3 main hypotheses. The first one was that we thought that the greater years of service someone was in the industry, the lower their total score would be. That just basically, like I mentioned earlier, more wear and tear in the body, increased biomechanical risk, more probably unhealthy habits as we age, lack of sleep, more responsibility, some more stress. So we figured that would kind of be a correlation. Now, what I will mention quickly is we didn't really go into years of service because we considered that sort of a little bit on the intrusive side, because people may not want to have given us their year, how old they were. So we went by years of service, and that kind of didn't play out as well as we thought it would. We also thought that the total score average would be lower than a 14. And that was based on the several studies that we saw where the average score for most physically fit or competitive athletes at the high school and college level, their average score was a 14. And it was assessed that the person with a score lower than 14, that kind of was a cutoff score. So 14 and below had a greater chance of injury, and that 14 and above were less likely to get injured. There's some debate on that for those of you that have followed through the FMS, but that was kind of like a cutoff score. So we went with that knowledge that we had from the other studies. And that we thought, as far as body parts, that the shoulder mobility and the forward fold would be the lowest scores. So forward fold is just basically a forward bend. So touch your hands to the floor. Because we had a lot of lower back injuries, we thought that would be a good example for us to find that. So we thought those 2, based on their field tasks and what we saw for injuries, were going to be the 2 highest or the lowest scores across all scores. Go ahead, Lexi. And so what we came up with, and there was a group of us kind of subject matter experts that determined what we thought would be the best movements. So we picked a squat. Squat allows you to assess a lot of different things, as you guys probably know. You got ankle range of motion, knee range of motion, hip, upper body, an alignment, symmetry both left and right. So that was a good one. We did a single leg dip. That was mostly for strength, so lower body strength, but also balance, because we know that balance plays a big part in people getting injured as far as slip, trip, and falls. Being able to know where your body is in space and being able to stay on your feet is going to help reduce the risk of injury. So we thought that was an important one. The shoulder mobility we did take from the FMS, and we just liked it because it combined a lot of motions and could give us a quick score as to symmetry on sides and functional shoulder movement. We also didn't want to leave out the scapulothoracic motion. So we did put in the scapulothoracic, basically your drop arm test, or your arm from your body goes all the way up to the side of your head and then back down. And then you're monitoring the scapulothoracic movement. We did that forward fold. Usually figured that was probably the most common one used for lower back and hamstrings and hip flexibility. We like the torso rotation because that would give you kind of symmetry of sides again, so right and left. You can do it standing and or sitting. Sitting just gives you a little bit better motion and ability to limit some of your lower body compensation. And then we did cervical side bending. So we could have done any number. As you know, there's a lot of different movements for the cervical, but we thought that side bending was usually prohibited and also involved more of the cervical and trapezius motion, where we would have, especially overhead linemen, had a lot of cervical issues as far as looking up or having hyperextension. So those were the 7 movements that we picked. And then you can slide that to the next one, Lexi, when you get there. So with scoring, and I know some of this is very small. Again, my presentation can be provided to anyone that might want it for a later date. But the scoring, again, we could have scored any which way. We could have done like, yes, they can do it, or no, they can't. Make it real simple, 0 and 1. But similar to the FMS, we wanted to break it up and use their scoring as well, so that we thought that it would give us some variability of the score, so that, you know, yeah, you can perform it, but you're also doing these kind of things that are showing us weakness or showing us imbalance. So we stayed with that scoring. And again, for the second side, which says about what's the real objective, it kind of is like that cutoff. So it's kind of like a 0 to 3, excuse me, where your 0s and 1s are where you're going to probably have the most dysfunction, especially with the foundation of mobility. And then that as you get the 2s and 3s, that's considered more, more normal, I guess. And I hate to use the word normal, so I apologize for that. But where you can have you have good mobility, but you might be able to work on stability and strength. And for those movements that we had done bilaterally, so obviously the squat is just one, where single leg dip is bilaterally, the shoulders bilaterally. There's quite a few of them that are. We would take the lower score. So again, that just gave us more opportunity to work with the employee and to create more improvement. And Lexi dropped in the chat, I believe, that little link that I have there. That just goes through a whole page on, or it's an article on scoring, why scoring is important, and kind of the breakdown of it for a little bit leisurely reading later. Go ahead, Lexi. So I know, again, these are small, but the score sheet is on the left is what we produced as a hand piece. So if you wanted to just use it and just kind of write with paper and pen and then enter it into the spreadsheet later, or if you wanted to, it was also a PDF, so you could just fill it in. We did want to keep the score sheets for a later date so that we could compare them and also see about changes within the individual, because we were taking the lower score for some of those symmetry motions, like the shoulder. If they had improvement or they didn't, if we did a retest, we couldn't tell with some, like they might get the same overall score, but individually they had improvements from side to side. So that's why we kept those sheets, the data for a bit, just to see if we needed to go back and see where some more specific changes had been made. And again, from what we did is from these sheets of the score of the individuals, we created an Excel spreadsheet, keep it simple, right? And we just did years of service, each score for each movement, and then a total score. And then we would have tests and then another page for retests. And that way we could run some data on it. And if we have some time through this presentation, I do have some data that we did extrapolate out and that you can just kind of take a look at if you're interested in data and metrics. You can switch that, Lexi. Excuse me. Never mind my cat. So when we're terminating the corrective exercises, which again is a whole nother component. So scoring and doing the assessment is one, but then now creating a program for someone is a little bit different. So again, Gray Cook utilizes this performance pillar where it goes from the base to the top. So you have base as your general movement. So that's basically your balance, your mobility, your flexibility, range of motion. The middle one is your performance level, and that has to do with your strength, your speed, agility, power. And then the top one is more skill or sport specific. And again, we're not necessarily getting into sport specific with our industrial athletes, but we could be, because a lot of the people that we did some screens on were pickleball players or were golf players. So they were trying to improve on their overall skill. So the way I look at it, the way I explain it to the individuals when I'm talking to them about their screen and kind of where we're going to go with it, with their results, is that the movement of the bottom level is the mobility is kind of where you start. So mobility is your foundation. So if you don't have a good foundation, just like a house, everything above that's going to crumble, right? So with a good foundation, that's going to help set you up for success. And if you have limited motion in a specific joint or a specific pattern, then anything you put on above that, the strength you gain, the stability you get with that is going to be in that limited motion. So again, you're kind of putting good on bad. So that's kind of how we explain it to them. And hopefully that kind of makes some understanding to you as well. So the best score could be a 21, right? We had 7 movements, highest score is a 3, so 21 would be your best score. So what we kind of did is we took that 14 as that cutoff score. So anywhere between a 0, so basically we took the 21, right? And we divided it into 3. So we got 3 groups of scores. So a 0 to 7 would probably give us our lowest score, right? But it would also give us our highest opportunity for improvement with the individual. And we would begin with that mobility, find out what areas they're not quite mobile in or their range of motion is limited and start working with that. If the score was more in the middle between an 8 and a 14, they still had a medium opportunity for improvement. And then we're going to kind of improve on their mobility where it might be lacking, and then also start into stability. And then if you had a score of 15 to 21, that's our lower opportunity because they're, doing pretty well. Score-wise and movement-wise and function-wise. And for them, we would work with probably starting with stability and then move towards strengthening or conditioning. So that's kind of how we broke them down by group. And as far as the corrective exercises, you want to think, okay, well, where do we start? Where are we trying to go? What do we want to accomplish? So we obviously want them feeling better. And a lot of times when you're asking those history questions, they would give you more information and then remember back like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why that still bothers me or why I can't turn that way. So as we all know, again, with the kinetic chain, the human body is a linked system. So we have our fascial lines, which go mostly through our core, as you can see. And they also cross, so they're cross patterns. And then with the joint by joint for mobility and stability, they kind of alternate each other, right? So we have, foot stability, but we need ankle mobility. And we have knee stability, but we need hip mobility. So they're all interconnected as well. So a lot of times we're looking at these patterns and these programs that we're going to create in multiple planes. It's not just going to be isolated to doing knee exercises. It might be knee with ankle or knee with rotation. So we're trying to link that whole system together. So that was one thing that we thought about and we thought was important to incorporate in our corrective exercises. Thanks, Lexi. So this builds again, and again, it's small, which is why if you want a copy of the presentation, I have no problem sharing it. So with the lowest scores, we wanted to create that foundation. Again, we want that nice solid foundation. So we had more opportunity for education on basically movement in general and how it all ties together, the importance of balance, starting with that, then working our way towards the core, and then posture, because those are all interconnected and they all play a part as to people not moving well and or getting a higher grade chance of injuries. So this kind of just explains, and it was used as a clinician's tip for other people that work within, so there's like a group of 6 of us, so that if they were going to be sharing this information, that they would kind of know where they should start based on their scores and kind of how to progress forward with their corrective exercises. And then with those higher scores that people got, we could build on the foundation they had to work with their stability and strength, and then integrating new patterns for improvement. So as an example, this would be a corrective exercise example for the shoulder mobility. So what we would do is we usually would take anywhere from 3 to 6 movements or exercises, so to speak, and kind of work from there. And the key that we found, and I think we could all agree as clinicians, is that rehab's tough, right? Or it's not really rehab. So, but working with an individual to improve on their abilities is tough, right? None of us really want to go out and work out every day, but we have to have some motivation and we have to have some reasoning. So what we found in our population was that if we gave them too many exercises, they wouldn't do them. It's overwhelming. I don't have time to do all that. I don't have 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day to spend doing these exercises. So we thought, okay, we'll keep it simple, and maybe even just 3, depending on, what we find in the assessment. But let's try these. We don't want to do a lot of reps. We don't want to do a lot of sets. We wanted to just get them moving, just performing it so that they had high compliance, because the more compliance that we saw, the more that they were willing to do more and to continue on in the progression of the exercises. So that's just something to think about if you're creating for anything and you're creating exercises for people. More, like someone else said in another talk, more isn't necessarily better. Sometimes just getting them, find the 3 most important ones you think that will be helpful for them, not 6 to 10 of them might be better for compliance with the exercise programs. Go ahead, Lexi. I think now, okay. So actually I'm doing pretty good on time. Does anybody have any questions, Lexi? Has anyone thrown any out or anything they can think of?
Not in the chat.
Okay. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. That tends to be another problem of mine. So hopefully I'm not going too fast. Okay. So this is just a little bit of our data that we collected. And again, I know it's really small, so that's why I created the highlights to the right. But these were based on our operations over a 3-year period, and we broke our divisions into 3. So we had gas, we had electric, and we had what we called support staff, which support staff ran anywhere from warehouse employees, fleet employees, to office workers. And over that 3-year period, excuse me, I'm just trying to find where I wrote that number down. We had 365 movement screens performed. And then they were broken down. So we had 199 gas workers in this data set. The average score for each movement is over to the top left. The average score was anywhere from mostly in the 1s to 2s range. And then it went by body part. So if you can remember the 7 body parts that we had, when we get to the 3rd one, which was the shoulder mobility is down. And then if you go all the way over, so the 2nd from the left was the torso rotation. So in these, we found that it was torso rotation and shoulder movement were the scores that were the lowest. Age years of service and the score wasn't very correlated. And again, because we had to use the years of service, you could have someone that might have been 50 that they had only been at this job for 2 years, as opposed to someone that may have worked the whole 35 years in this job from age 18. So the years of service didn't give us really what we wanted, but I think age would have given us a little bit more data to work with. But again, we didn't want to ask that question. So might be something for future use. The average score, as you can see in that left, right lower quadrant, was a 14. So it kind of sat right on that, which was interesting to us. So that was our gas operations, and we had 199 of them. And then if you go to the next one, Lexi, this was our electric group. So we had 128 of them. Again, average scores on the left. So again, the lowest one here was the shoulder mobility. And then the single leg dip, which I found was kind of interesting with them. Don't really have an explanation for it yet. We haven't done much of the data review of that. And then their average score also was a 14. And age and years of service and score again was more all over the place than with the gas. So that was kind of interesting. We were trying to see if based on the skills, if that would make a difference. A new hire versus a veteran. So here at where I work, we don't have a lot of involvement with new hires as far as like being right when they show up. It's at a training center that we're not at, and we're trying to work on that to get someone there. But we do in our individual yards. So honestly, personally, I had more experience or more luck with the veterans than I did with the new hires, because I kind of got those people I saw all the time that had good relationships with frequent flyer people, as we call them, and they would do perform the mobility screen. They'd get the exercises, they'd start to feel better, and then they'd by word of mouth pass it to the other colleagues, and they'd say, "Hey, have you had your movement screen done? Where do you sit? What's your score?" As you know, how we're all competitive. So I would say we did get more with the older population, but I forget, and I don't have it listed here, but I could find it if you're really interested, what the average years of service was. It tended to be more in like the 10 to 15 years of service range. And then lastly, Lexi was the one on the support group. So we didn't do as many of them. We only had 38 support group people. Again, their correlation with years of service and score didn't correlate. Their average score was a little bit low. It was a 13. And their body parts were the shoulder, but it was their number one was the single leg dip, and then the squat and shoulder. So they were more on that end of it. So I think the squat and the single leg dip is because they sit a lot. A lot of these people were more of the office workers than they were like fleet and warehouse. So, but even they sit significantly too. So I'm wondering if that had anything to do with it. And their score was a little lower. Their age, I'm trying to think with the support people, their age was probably up on the higher end of years of service, probably higher than 10 or 15. We have some people that have like 40 years of experience or years of service at one company, which I think is crazy. So that was kind of the data set. And those were just initial tests. So they weren't retests or anything. So we did get retests. We just haven't done the data on it. So if you go to the next slide, Lexi, I believe. So this was a pilot study we did with a group. There was only 19 people. It was just overhead electric group in 2 different yards, so to speak. And we did do a pre-test, post-test. So what we did is we did a pre-test on all 19. So it's like 9 out of one yard and 10 out of the other. And then 6 weeks later, we did a retest. They were given corrective exercises, and then they did a retest. So based on that data, and again, it's a very small subject set, I understand that. But what we did see was a pretty significant improvement in that shoulder mobility or the shoulder score from pre to post. We had a lot of 1s, but we dropped down and wound up having a lot more 2s. So that was good. And they were more symmetrical. And then the other one, which was the cervical. If you go all the way to the end, the cervical, we had a lot of change in that one as well. And again, we think we have good cervical motion, but again, you have to remember, we're all forward now, right? I'm actually sitting forward. So I'm actually probably performing the worst way of sitting, but we're on our phones. We're sitting at the desk. We're looking down at the ground. So we're doing a lot more with that. And there's a lot limited motion for especially that lateral side bending. So we found that interesting. That was one data set that we pulled out. And the next page was, again, a change in total score. So that was from pre-test to post-test. The first one you just saw, the prior slide, was individual scores. So a 1, 2, or 3. This was just overall scores. And the black line indicates the change in score. And most of them were 2. So there was a numerically 2. So if they got like a 8 on their initial, they got a 10 on their retest. So most of them did make improvement. You do see a couple that are below that line, whether they're on the negative side. And some of those were that what we found out when we asked a follow-up survey was that they didn't complete the corrective exercises that were given. And they didn't, the day of the retest, they just didn't really feel it. So they didn't really try very hard. So we thought that was interesting too. And as part of that survey, we gave them, I think it was a 10-question survey that just asked some stuff about, I just pulled out two. That one was, how difficult did they find the assessment to perform? Because again, if we're going to spend time doing it, do they find that it's worthwhile? Do they think it's too long? Do they think, that it's, going to take up too much of their time? So 36% thought it was easy. And then the other 58% thought it was somewhat easy. There was no one thought it was difficult to perform. And a small portion thought it was somewhat difficult. And that may have been that their scores weren't very good or their movement patterns weren't very good. But overall, it was easy for them to do. And the time that it took didn't take long. So that was good as a selling point, to be like, hey, it doesn't take that long. You're going to get some good information out of it. And everybody thought that the directions were easy to understand and that they were able to perform it. And then the next one that we pulled out that we thought was pretty cool was, if you performed the corrective exercises, did you see improvement? So obviously, if you're not going to do the work, you might not see improvement. But if you did do the exercises and you did see improvement, how did you feel about that? So yes, a whopping majority of almost 79% said that if they did the exercises, they did see an improvement and they felt better. Where, what was it? 16% just said NA, or they didn't complete the exercises. So you're going to get that regardless. So we thought that was another good example of how they felt about performing the movement screen. So that was it with that, Lexi. Any questions on that with the data before I go kind of into this piece? I can think of some questions that people might have, but we'll save those to the very end because we are almost done. There's a couple more slides, but so regardless of doing a movement screen, but although this will help in that, we wanted to provide education and programming to all of our employees. So this was voluntary. No one is required to complete these movement screens. And again, people would say, like, is it a separate thing? Do they sign up for it? Do you try to get all new hires to do it? There's all different ways these can be incorporated into your setting. In all of the above are answers that you could try. Ones that have worked well for us have been more of that nonchalant, not regimented, not organized. We'll have people that will that I'll suggest when they come in to have they're having an evaluation on, like, their elbow's been bothering them or their shoulder. As I'm doing their assessment and doing range of motion, I throw a couple of the shoulder and neck ones in, and then I ask them to do the other ones. Sometimes they'll just do them and not ask questions. Other times they'll ask, like, why am I doing a single leg lunge or a squat with my, my problem with my elbow or my shoulder? And then I just kind of explain that it's all part of the interconnected body mechanics, kinetic chain, and that, I'm trying to look at them in totality, so they don't mind. Other times we've had people do signups and have done all new employees. And as they come in, it's just part of their whole, like, orientation, and they just don't even know what's happening. So that's kind of interesting too. I've incorporated some of them into our morning stretch and flex programs at the hub meetings. We'll do like an education piece, and then we'll do a stretching routine. And I've incorporated that. We have, as a group, have incorporated them into our stretches, so that if you wanted to do the stretches and kind of watch one or two people doing all the movements, you can almost get it that way. And then just kind of go up to that person afterwards and say, hey, while we were doing the stretching, I saw that, you had difficulty or you were struggling doing these. What do you think about if I can give you some exercises that might help you with that? So that, and trying to find out what they like to do outside of work. Golf's a big one, pickleball, throwing ball with their kids, doing yard work, that type of stuff. But as far as overall education, we found out that there's 4 main important parts. You have the importance of movement, importance of posture, importance of core strength, and again, that importance of balance. Those 4 components are, if you can get them educated and get them with some exercises and some education, then what can happen is they're more or less likely, to probably have or sustain an injury. Granted, all injuries aren't, avoidable, You can do all you want for balance, but you still might slip on ice and fall and, break your wrist. So it's just ways to help prevent them and educate them. So our big thing, and I'm sure at your sites, is about education. So we created some programming around that. So the importance of movement, where, we talk about promotion of healing, or what helps and hinders healing process, importance of taking micro breaks, importance of performing the stretching movements, making it accessible to them to see the stretches, the visually see the stretches, so that they can do them anytime they want. So it could be pre-stretch when you're not there. They're up on their boards. There's a video of them. So there's different ways to get that out there. The importance of their posture, providing fact sheets, providing posture assessments for them, and the effects of negative posture, and how they can improve their posture overall, and how that will help their upper back, lower back, shoulder, thoracic, cervical as well. Importance of the core strength, how that, stability and balance, how they are cross-functional patterns that we have with the fascia. Again, integrating low back and the hips, because they kind of work together, and just overall functional fitness. And then the importance of balance. So importance of reaction time, how it can improve strength and it improves agility. So we worked with the employees overall, whether they do the program or not, with this. But when we do have them do the movement screen, we kind of integrate all of those into their corrective exercises. Okay, Lex. So in summary, what did we get here with our proactive workplace safety movement screens? Movement screens are a valuable tool to assess and mitigate injury risks in, specifically, I put utility setting because that's where I work, but any setting. The utility worker movement screen was developed to address common biomechanical and non-biomechanical risk factors. The screen assesses key movement patterns relevant to utility worker tasks. Score results that help us identify specific areas for corrective exercises. And the data analytics provides us insight into injury trends and program effectiveness. So the more information we get on the trends of the injuries that we're seeing and or preventing, we can pass those along to key stakeholders, and they will, obviously they're very happy about it. At our site, they love this screen. They've embraced it both all the way up to the, CEO. Some of them have actually done the screen, and they've allowed us to, they actually reached out to us to create a video for it so that employees could see it, so that if they weren't sure they wanted to do it, that it really wasn't that big of a deal. So that's been pretty cool. And then I think lastly, I have a key takeaway page. Oh, no, I have my success story. Let me do, Lexi, if you could you just flip them, and instead of the success story, go to the next one? Okay, so, yeah, so the key takeaways, I think, I kind of sat down and thought, okay, what are the most important things for someone to get out of this talk? So you obviously have to know your industry, right? Because every industry is different. For those of you that have worked in different industries, you can speak the loudest. I've only been in the one, but the job tasks are different, even for me, from electric to gas to the support workers to the fleet to the stockroom. They're all different. They all do different jobs. So you know your industry. You want to pick movements that matter. You might think that, you guys can do 3 movements that are really important, that can help give you some information that will help decrease the risks at your site. You may think that, 5 or 7 is more appropriate. So pick the movements that matter for you and for your workers. But when you're doing that, make sure you pick patterns that are functional. We don't work in silos, so we don't just, do bicep curls. We kind of, lift, but when we're lifting, we have to engage our core. We have to bend our knees. So make sure that you're picking tasks that are functional. Try to develop a system. And that's kind of the different examples I gave you as far as, incorporating it into your physical assessments or your stretch and flex programs. Trying to develop a system that's consistent and that works for you, so that you can understand your data and then be able to report out on it to higher ups, but also to give the corrective exercises to the employees. I think obtaining a baseline is probably the most important, no matter when you obtain it, because without the baseline, we don't know if they're improving or they're not. So waiting till they get an injury, an actual work-related injury, is probably too late. If we're working, sometimes what will happen as you're doing the movement screens, you'll actually uncover some areas that we'll call them non-work related injuries, that's what it's come from. And then you can work on improving that as well. With the corrective exercises, make sure that you're starting with the mobility as your foundation, then working to stability, then working towards conditioning or strengthening with agility. Have a plan, keep them simple, keep them manageable and ask them what exercises they would like. So if you have 6 you're choosing from, work with the employee so that they have a buy-in, just like you would in a clinic or you would at your high school or college. Pick some so that they have some say in it, so that they're more likely to do it if they, enjoy doing it or feel like there's a benefit to it. And don't forget to incorporate that total worker health. You want to make sure that you're talking about their unrelated issues as far as your, sleep patterns, stress management, nutrition, hydration, all of those other things that play a factor into the total worker and other factors that will affect risk of injury. So I have about 5 minutes. Let's go back to that other one, Lexi, if you can. We'll still get that word. The code word is kinetic. I'll throw that out there. I just wanted to give a success story, and I know that you can't read this little chart that I have going on, but what I did was I took one of the workers that one of the first guys I did a movement screen on. He's actually one of the safety advocates. And so he is an avid golf player, but he's had some injuries, he's had some surgeries, he's, kind of overweight. But he's like, hey, how can you help me? He was going to say, he wasn't so sure initially if I could, but he was like, how are you going to help me? So based on his test scores, I provided a program. To begin with was just a general mobility program, a stretching program that involved upper body, lower body, because he wasn't even doing that. And so kind of every month I would check in with him. He could check in whenever he wanted if he was having questions or concerns with the exercises. But every month I would check in with him, would set up an appointment, even if it was only 5 minutes. And I'd just say, hey, how the exercise going? Are you having any problems with them? And then as we would go, we would determine, yeah, these are getting a little easy, and he'd demonstrate it, and I'd make it more difficult, or we'd change the activities, would move from mobility to stability and then to some strengthening. So we kind of every month checked in and did this and modified the program. But he also started doing some more walking. He was able to walk the course better because he had better movement. He was eating better and sleeping better. So he was feeling better overall. He was starting to lose some weight. So which gave him more motivation to, really get out there and do the exercises. So went through this for about 6 months, and then we did a retest. And his retest, he did have some improved scores. But what he did find out was that he was able to swing the golf club better. He had more accuracy, and he just felt better overall. And he was walking the course, not riding the cart. So I think that's a success story in that we continue, we still meet in, we still check in, but he's more doing his own thing, not so much corrective exercises. But so what I didn't mention was like, when do you retest? When is a good time to retest? Well, because there's not a lot of data out there, there is no set time. So that's why we did that pilot study that was at a 6-week interval. I tend to like to personally do between 3 and 6 months, just to give them enough time to adapt and to make changes that are going to be noticeable so that they feel accomplished. I feel like if I do it too soon and there's not much change, that it's not going to set them up for success and that they're less likely to continue with it. So that's just me personally. So we're trying to figure that out.
Hey, Carrie, we have a question in the chat. How would you suggest scaling this program for a larger operation?
Okay, so trying to do multiple people at one time, is that correct? Yeah, okay. So yeah, that is a challenge. These are pretty much one-on-one. As you get better at it, you can do more than one-on-one. I can do probably a group of maybe 6 that I can actually see them do it within a time. You probably could. You may not want to do 7 movements, that's for sure. And you may have to do it in like a station type thing, maybe where you're doing 5 to 10 or maybe 15 people at one time. That could be one idea. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas. Mine have been no more than like 5 at one time. I know that some of our other people that are just starting to do them or don't feel as confident is better with the one-on-one, but I would probably do more of a station thing. And if I'm correct, you might be the only EIS or injury prevention specialist on site. because if you could get multiple multiple EISs to help you out, that would be beneficial too. That's a great question because I haven't had to necessarily deal with that. It is something for me to think about. I have no problem. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to do them all at one time, I don't think. So I would definitely pick less movements. Maybe 3 would be better to start with. Maybe 3 main ones that you can think of. And then try to do it that way so that you can manage it all at once. I don't know. I would have to think about that. Ideally, having more EISs to help you with that. There are ones that wouldn't even be one-on-one that they could do virtually. That's coming out there too. There's some companies are already not using that.
Carrie, there's one more good question in here too.
Okay, yeah, please.
I'm gonna jump on that one. What outcomes have you seen year over year in recordables or lost work days?
So that we're trying to track as well. What we did do, because, well, so it was supposed to be anonymous, right? So we don't have names on any of our data, which we don't, but we do have the names on the sheet of the people. So we do know who the people are. So we have been trying to track that, or I've been at least trying to track my group, my employees to my sites, and to see where they're fallen on the IMS, what we call IMS, injury tracking. We have seen improved results as far as less recordables and less days lost from work. We have seen it. It's there. We just haven't been able to connect the 2 systems yet. We should be able to do that a little bit more with some improved EMR tracking to be able to do that. But it is noticeable, because I can at least tell you from my employees that there's less of them, the repeat, as I want to call repeat offenders, that are on the injury system.
All right. Well, we want to be respectful to everybody's time. Yes. Carrie, thank you so much. Katie, I see that there's one more question if you want to connect with Carrie in Discord, in the chat. Your speaker code is kinetic. Can you guys see that okay? Make sure you grab that before you head out, and everybody have a great day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all for joining. Feel free to ask questions through the chat or through Discord. Lexi, you can also, if they need access to the PowerPoint, they can have that too.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.